Hello and welcome.
Live streaming is on.
Hello and welcome to Undercurrent News's latest webinar, Dissecting the Land-Based Aquaculture Trend. And we're going to talk about one of the hottest topics in the industry. And I'm joined by a very distinguished panel of experts on this topic. First of all, I would just like to thank our sponsors for making this event, helping to make this event happen. So I would like to mention the Center for Aquaculture Technologies and Zeeland. I would just like to say to everybody listening that the two sponsors have no input into the content that we will show or provide in this webinar, but they're sponsors, and we thank them very much for their participation backing. So first of all, I would just, the format that we'll follow here, I'll introduce the panel. I'll do a brief presentation just to really set up the topic, which will be between 5 and 10 minutes. And then I will ask everybody a question myself, and then we'll move to the outside audience. We've got a big audience today, I understand. So I'm expecting that we're going to have lots of really interesting questions. So first of all, I would like to introduce Roberto Tischler, who's a sales director for Aqua Mouth. Roberto, perhaps you could just say 1 or 2 words about yourself, please.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Roberto Tischler, Director of Sales here at Aqua Mouth for the last 3 years now. First, thank you for inviting me today. Genuinely honored to take part in this important panel with such distinguished industry leaders. Aqua Mouth is a RAS technology provider specializing in our own proprietary systems. It was established over 30 years ago, actually by fish farmers, with the aim of solving many of the problems in the aquaculture in Israel. We do have a very developed aquaculture industry here in Israel with a variety of fish species, tilapia, sea bream, barramundi, and more. We are known to find solutions to those challenges, saving energy, saving on water, and we've been focusing on developing our own RAS technology for the last years for the benefit of our land-based facilities worldwide, and really humbled to be here today with you and share some of this experience with you.
Thank you, Roberto. And we're also joined by Jeff Cheng, who's the CEO of Nocera, a company that is specialized in designing land-based aquaculture systems. Jeff, if you could just introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Cheng. I'm the president and CEO of Nocera. We are one of the biggest land-based RS solution company in Asia. We're happy to announce that we built the biggest land-based fish farm in China. And last year we moved to Taiwan in combination of solar sharing, and we are providing the most cost efficient in terms of value system. So right now, the fish farmer in Taiwan is testing our products and our equipment, and in the future we're going to move into United States and South America. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'll move to Stian Rognet, who's the Global Commercial Manager for Closed Farm Systems for Skretting. Stian, if you would like to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. That was a good effort on the name. My name is Stian Rognlid, and as Matt said, I'm working as a Global Commercial Manager, specifically with Landbased and for Skretting, which is a market leader in RAS feed. My job is to work directly with RAS customers alongside my colleagues in the various markets to ensure that efforts are aligned across our different functions and geographies, and also to keep the finger on the pulse to make sure that we deliver on our promises to our customers.
Great, thank you, Stian. And I would now like to introduce John Buchanan, who's the CEO of the Center for Aquaculture Technologies.
Thanks, Matt, and happy to be here today. So as you said, I'm the CEO for the Center for Aquaculture Technologies. We're a contract research organization that supports the industry, and we have facilities on the east coast of Canada and the west coast of the US. And we're pretty extensive facilities where we conduct disease challenge trials for the industry, testing health products. We also run nutrition trials and testing different feed ingredients and feed products. We also have a pilot scale extruder where we can make research scale diets and test different methods for extrusion for novel feed protein ingredients like insect meal and other types of applications. We have a diagnostic team and have been doing some interesting work in microbiome assessment, which is relevant to RAS sometimes, and how the bacterial populations change in response to different factors. The facility is set up to run saltwater or freshwater, RAS or flow through, and everything down to very cold 4 degrees C to 30 degrees C for a variety of species. We also have a genetics team, genetics, genomics, and genome editing. And in that aspect, we work on with clients developing lines of fish to solve problems and create possibilities in the industry. So working mainly in health, nutrition, and genetics.
That's great. Thank you very much. And finally, I would like to introduce Ohad Mayman, who is the CEO of the Kingfish Co.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Undercurrent News, for inviting us to join the panel. My name is Ohad Mayman. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Kingfish Company. We operate a vertically integrated RAS seafood company, in our view, going from design, engineering, installation, full cycle hatchery construction, and up to marketing, sales, and processing. We are currently active in Europe, in the Netherlands, with a second site in advanced permitting in Maine for the US market. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much. And we really look forward to hearing more about the new project, Ohad. So I am going to bore you as little as possible with my presentation. I know that we're going to have lots of questions, and we'll get through it as quickly as possible, but really the idea is just to set up the conversation here. So dissecting the aquaculture trend, the land-based aquaculture trend. Sorry, a little bit of sales here, but we did a project or a report last year, and we did a data-driven approach to look at what was happening in the land-based salmon space. We found more than 80 project proposals as of August 2020, and 30 operating projects. And amazingly, in this world with the pandemic and all of the issues that are going on, this trend is just continuing apace. We've identified 19 new grow-out projects. This is just in the salmon space. And I would also highlight that we are going to talk about all species in this webinar. And I was listening to Therese Log-Beaufort, the CEO of Skretting, just a few days ago at the IFO conference, and reminding us that there's a lot of capital and investor interest in this space. It's happening in shrimp as well, and we've identified several projects where companies are testing technology, trying to really master RAS technology in shrimps. And Aqua Mouth, who are present on this call, have been very active in this process, and it would be great to hear from them. And other species are beginning to emerge now. I'm delighted that Ohad has joined us as one of the most advanced projects in other species. And it's quite remarkable how Kingfish is now on the Oslo Stock Exchange, and is, as Ohad mentioned, moving towards a commercial scale facility in the US. And again, I think one of the big trends we've seen in the last few months and perhaps year is how the industry has just become mainstream. So we've seen a handful of companies list on the Oslo Stock Exchange. The infographic that we produced was really just looking at the salmon industry, but in actual fact, the Kingfish Co. has now joined that group, so that there's a whole set of companies trading in Norway that are building these new projects, and it's fascinating. And our most recent report, published with Undercurrent News, which provides a ranking of the salmon industry, shows how some of these land-based companies could enter the rankings by 2024, and it's more than just one company. One of the last things that I would also mention as well is just the equity performance of this group. And it's been remarkable to see how Atlantic Sapphire has reached such a high valuation on the exchange in the last few months. And obviously, I don't want to be overly negative and focus on some of the difficulties that this company has faced, but it has highlighted how the fortunes of these companies might in a little bit be tied. We've found high correlation in the equity performance of the group. And if you look at, for example, Proximar Seafood, which is another company that is developing a full land-based RAS system, it's very highly correlated with the Atlantic Sapphire equity performance. And so it really underscores the fact that the investors are very interested in this technology, and very much this is now a kind of an investment class. And I'm going to be really interested to get some opinions from our panel on these trends. So I will end it there and get into questions, and hopefully gracefully come out of this attachment mode. And let's see. There you go. Right. So let's start with, so I'll get straight into the questions. And I think that let's start in a different order to how we did the introductions. Perhaps start with Stian. I think that Skretting has been very active in looking at the land-based movements in the salmon industry and in other species. I'd just like to get your sense of how at Skretting you look at this movement and what's happening. And perhaps if you think there's a disconnect between disproportionate investor interest, or this is just the way that aquaculture is going right now.
Sure. So the global population, of course, will reach close to 10 billion by 2050, and it needs quality protein. So RAS is actually perfectly in line with our purpose of feeding the future. It's not, in our view, a replacement for traditional farming. It's not a case of RAS or traditional, it's a case of RAS and traditional. And we are heavily committed to the success of the industry. RAS technology allows for creation of an ecosystem that creates similar environment to traditional farming. And these are, I mean, there are several interesting species, including salmon, which we all know tends to get a lot of headlines in the newspapers, but also notably yellowtail, barramundi, and shrimp, to mention a few. And what I really like about RAS personally is that it makes it possible to farm fish everywhere, so irrespective of location and species. And our job as a company and a feed producer is to ensure that feed is not a limiting factor to this, to the expansion. And by limiting factor, I mean aquaculture in any form. So we are a market leader in RAS, and we have produced patented feed solutions for years, early life stages in all salmon geographies, and also, for example, we're doing full grow out now in both Europe and North America. The competence is based on decades of R&D, including dedicated RAS research facilities. And you mentioned, I think, the turbulent stock markets and our views on that. So we look at RAS in the long term. We are not too concerned about the sentiment of the market. And as you know, New Frontiers, which is a separate division within Nocera from Skretting, has done some investments in RAS. I don't think that they are following the movements in the stock market too closely. Their mandate is to create or to make sure that we participate in long-term value generation. So that's our view on that.
Great, thank you, Stian. And Roberto, I'll move to you. Aqua Mouth has been very present in this industry from early days, and we've seen how the company has really tried to develop a global presence and go quite aggressively at this market, and the timing seems to be impeccable. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about Aqua Mouth's experience, and perhaps just add a comment about the developments in the shrimp industry, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, well, we have been taking more and more part in this industry. We have several projects on the way already, actually 10 going simultaneously in that case, in different stages of development. Some under design, some under construction, some already commissioned, and some in operation. In terms of shrimp, we have our own dedicated R&D facility in the south of Israel that has been used for years to cultivate different species of fish. The ones that I mentioned before, sea bream and other types. And it's being used lately for the last years to cultivate shrimp by our subsidiary AquaShrimp. We have very good results there, and we hope that we already know that it works for shrimp. I do believe that there will be more presence. We'll be going into more and more projects that are not only salmon and not only smolts, but also yellowtail kingfish, as is already being done so nicely by Ohad and his great team in the Kingfish company, and also grouper, which is a fast-growing fish with very tasty, and all these different types of fish that are going to be more evident in future projects.
That's great. Thank you. Actually, that's a great moment to transfer to Ohad. You've had a remarkable journey, and I've been in the Netherlands and I've seen the facility, and you guys have grown very quickly in a short period of time. Could you tell us a little bit about your expansion into the US, and just perhaps just document how you think that other companies could follow your success story, perhaps?
Sure. Thank you. I think it's important to mention we have been able to move fast and to some extent hit the ground running since inception about 5 years ago. To a large extent, thanks to the lifelong career and input of our co-founder and actual RAS expert in the group, Case Clute, that has spent over 30 years in RAS in general, but 10 years specifically figuring out the yellowtail. I think when we looked at the opportunity that RAS technology affords, I went into the sector in 2013, where the argument seemed to have been quite polarized between, on the one hand, it will never work, to the other hand, it will replace everything. And I think that's a bit of a natural tendency at the early stages of a new technology, whereas over time, once the technology is proven viable, which in our view it has, the big question becomes how best to use it. And I think it's quite important to think of the technology, when done right and when operated carefully, works. But then what species in what market is quite an important question. In our view, some of the strategic advantage of RAS is enabling import replacement. So because it can be built anywhere, we think that building it at the market makes sense. And we still tend to look towards the higher value species, since it is not a cheap technology. As far as with that philosophy in mind, we identified both Europe and North America as our target markets, since the yellowtail kingfish specifically is primarily produced in Japan and imported into these two territories. And I think to your question of, well, what we've seen is that it was important to prove early milestones in order to be able to grow. Meaning we've gone through the phase of seed investors to VC and now into growth capital. And each of these steps was enabled by ticking the boxes, showing that the system works, the product comes out in high quality, and that the market buys it.
Right. That's great. Thank you. And just I'll go to John Buchanan. And from your experience, coming from a slightly different angle through biotech, and just your broad view of the aquaculture industry in general, what challenges do you think remain out there for land-based to become mainstream and really a big part of the aquaculture volume produced globally each year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you could argue it's already become mainstream. There's lots of discussions, investment, and activity in the sector. The big commitments initially were around engineering, and that's still a major focus. And feeds obviously has to be a focus. The way the diets are formulated is quite different and needs to be optimized for RAS. The last step in the puzzle, and from my perspective, is looking at the genetics of the fish. So RAS is a very capital intensive investment. The economics are very well understood, and once you get to scale, then investment in improving the fish makes sense. And I think that we're approaching that point, especially for salmon, but many of the species where an improvement in growth as you're moving fish through the tanks. There's always while you're waiting for the biomass to grow, there's the inefficiency there that can be recaptured with faster growing fish, just very simply. But obviously, better FCR or the waste products from the fish that allow a biofilter to support a larger biomass would be fundamentally transformative to the industry and the profitability. And we've done some work in my past. I was the director of R&D for Aqua Bounty, so we was looking at biotech solutions to solve those problems. They can be addressed through breeding, and there's new technologies in genome editing, and RAS is also contained, so that there's a lot of benefits to really taking the next step in the industry and getting the genetics to complement both the feeds and the engineering. That's a good opportunity for the future.
That's great. Thanks very much. And finally, Jeff, I'm very curious to know. We've seen this trend so far to build large-scale RAS facilities. There's been a lot of Norwegian capital, Nordic capital. Seems to be quite focused on the Americas and Europe. But what's going on in Asia? I know that you're very active in this space, and please give us an overview.
Sure. So when everybody started talking about salmon, our focus is mainly on like the cheaper fish, like tilapia, catfish, the freshwater fish, because looking at the Chinese market, I would say majority, 90% of Chinese people are still not rich, so they can't afford salmon, even though the salmon consumption in Asia is growing like crazy because of sushi. I mean, even in Taiwan, in Japan, we have our own ship boats, basically go out and start catching salmon when they farm salmon. Even like the Chinese, they're building, these on the North Sea, there's like a huge hexagon, salmon fish farm. But, to the extent that, our focus is mainly about, when everybody focuses on salmon, our focus is mainly on, spreading the technology where we can build a cheap, enough, efficient, a product where it can use, especially in China, in countries like Brazil, South America. And that's why, we're confident that, I'm expanding into the US market as well. Because salmon is not our focus. Our focus is tilapia. And because of the trade war, because of the COVID, because the freight increased like 400%, if you look at the tilapia price compared to salmon recently, tilapia price in the US is $7.50 per pound, and salmon is $9.50. Okay, and tilapia from Indonesia is selling at Costco $8 a pound. You look at salmon, right? So there's a huge increase in terms of the pricing. So we want to make sure that we can spread our technology, and the way of doing that is we give away our equipment to local farmers in Taiwan. We are testing our equipment because when we started in China, we were locally freshwater equipment company. We never done saltwater fish. Okay, so we gave the equipment in Taiwan we built a showroom. We have fish farmer has 30 or 40 years experience. They do clam, they do shrimp, they do eel, they do tilapia. We just gave it, here's a tank, use it. And in the last 3 or 4 months, we were able to turn freshwater tilapia into seawater, and the price increased like 200% because now it's the seawater fish. So, when I see this market, of course, salmon could have, when people are focusing on all these huge bigger margin fish, like salmon or yellowtail, tuna, But our focus is mainly to, we want to build a system that's capable of doing in every places. Like, for example, in Japan, right, surrounded by sea. So we are also going to, after COVID, we're going to work with Japan Agriculture, Japan Coast, where we're going to use our tank and build facilities, near the seaside, and we will be able to, fish farm like tuna fish as well. So I don't want to limit, to a certain species. I want them to be built that will cater to different species by, just a small operation. Because right now we are testing eel right now. So that's what I'm trying to say is, like, our focus is mainly on the freshwater fish, where there's a huge more demand. Like,
Jeff, I think I've lost you on volume.
you hear me now?
Oh yeah, it just cut out. Yes.
Sorry. So I'm saying that because these are two huge different markets. Okay, if you like salmon, then you think catfish has a muddy smell. But if you like tilapia, then you think salmon has a fishy smell. So when everybody's focused on salmon, our focus is on freshwater fish, because that's where 90% of the human population are depending on, especially in the U.S. and South America or South Africa. And even in China right now, 90% or 95% of people are still poor. They cannot afford salmon. They never seen salmon before in their life. So they're still relying on freshwater fish. So what I'm trying to say is, like, we are focusing, to develop a technology that's capable of delivering RAS to different species using different type of water and in different environments. And that's our focus.
That's great. Hello? Thank you. I'm going to move. That's great. Thanks very much, Jeff. I just actually a late reminder that everybody, the outside audience, can send us questions, and we will try and get through as many questions as possible. We already have some, so I'm going to begin with those right now. And I think actually this is a great follow-on from what Jeff was talking about. A lot of the early questions that we've had, unsurprisingly, are about margins, the profitability of RAS, and which are the highest margin fish. Perhaps I'll start with Roberto at Aqua Mouth. There's at least two questions asking, which species produces the highest gross margin in the RAS system? Is it still Atlantic salmon? So perhaps I'll start with you.
Well, I believe that each project is different. It's not only the price of the fish, but also a lot of other factors are involved. The initial capex invested, the opex, and the production costs and everything. In this industry, in the RAS land-based industry, it's normally you choose the more premium fish, the premium priced fish like salmon and yellowtail and grouper and the likes. But when we look at it, we try to do two things basically. One is, with time and with improvements, we can actually lower the initial capex involved on the terms of the technology itself first, and then on how it implicates or affects the construction cost in that sense. And the second is the OPEX, the production costs. Now, it starts with the design. It starts when you invest in the design when you think of the design of the system itself, to do two things. One, to lower the consumption or the use of energy and water as much as you can. And second, in putting inside the technology, inside the design, as much redundancy and firewalls and whatever you can to avoid any malfunctions and failures and everything. And there is a careful balance between that. We base our design according to more physical elements than mechanical ones, so that we use gravity more to reduce the use of pumps, for example. We use settlers instead of drum filters that are mechanical elements that consume a lot of energy. We apply a DNS system that conserves the water and allows for recycling of the water to be reused into the system. So when you start with the design, and the design itself is enabling to lower the production cost, then it makes the entire business more financially viable, at least.
Right, that's great, thank you. Perhaps I'll just go around a little bit with this question. It seems to be quite a recurrent question. Stian, how do you see this? The different margins between species. Has Skretting kind of focused more on, say, one or two species rather than others, just because you see different margins in the business?
Yeah, so I think the last speaker made an excellent point that it's of course very dependent on many factors, such as location and technology and operational excellence, etc. Up until now, our main focus, you could say, has been salmon, but that doesn't mean that we believe more in salmon than other species, or we think that all the money, let's say, put it that way, is in salmon. That has to do with active projects around the world that we've been involved in.
Right, thank you. And actually, Jeff, I wanted to come back to you on this question as well, just on the margin question before we move on to other species, because you seem to be saying, or you were saying in your previous comments, that that you can profitably farm these perhaps lower value species in a RAS system.
Correct. Basically, you got to think about it like in Asia, right? Usually we consider tilapia to be the cheapest fish in Asia, especially China, Vietnam, Taiwan. So these fish farmers, they only make about 10 cents, 20 cents per pound to raise these fishes. But if we were to raise these fish in US, my net profit margin is $1. It's almost like 12 times more for raising the same fish, just different locations. So, and the reason we're using RAS is because we are able to control the environment in a more smaller scale of water. Our tanks is like 100 tons compared to, if you were trying to control the water quality of 1 hectare of water, then that's a lot, right? If I want to turn this 1 hectare of water into seawater, it's going to be a problem. So, like everybody else says, the design, the cost of RAS really determines your profit margin. And because Nocera, we can develop a system that is cheap enough that I can recover my cost in 3 years. Because of COVID, we actually have requests from the US. A lot of my friends, we got requests from the Brazilian government. Can you build a family-size system? Can you build a system that I can put in my backyard? And we did. We actually built a 10-meter system with independent filtration system, independent biomass system, in a tank that's only about 10 meters wide, 1.5 meter high, and that can be operated by itself. And the most important, the beauty of this system is it only takes me 1 kilowatts, to power the whole RAS. Okay, think about that, 1 kilowatt of power. Okay, so that's how efficient that we are right now. And to increase the density of this high density fish farming, we actually equip with our own design of oxygen generator. Okay, so our tanks are filled with oxygens, not water bubbles. So to the extent if I want to put 5,000 kilo, 10,000 kilo into a tank, I just turn on my oxygen generator and the fish will survive. So it's like economy of scale. So right now, because we had a press release, we're going to co-develop a 60-hectare of industrial park for fish farm in Taiwan. We got invited to Georgia. So right now we are in discussion. Nocera is almost like the TSMC of fish farming in Taiwan. Okay, so we have the whole supply chain of hatchery, fish farming, fish feed, processing and frozen storage. So the state of Georgia, Atlanta in the U.S., actually is inviting the Taiwanese government to go over there and invest and build a whole supply chain. So if we were to build, I did the math, right? If I were to invest $300 million in build 5,000 tanks, we're gonna make about $100 million in a year. So talking about margin, the margin is big. If you can massively produce this fish in a controlled environment. So that's why when people start talking about salmon, sturgeon, it's not that hard to farm sturgeon. Okay, it's just water. What kind of water? What kind of equipment? The design is how do you produce equipment that everybody can afford, and I think that's the most important part. And with Nocera, we are able to do that.
Right, that's great, Jeff. I'm going to move on just because of the limitations that we have with time. And I would like to move on to some other questions. And thank you for answering that. I think it was important for you to answer that question as we were going into the profitability and the margins. Now, Ohad, I would like to ask you, there's one question which I think you'd be a great person to answer. Will the future be dominated by a few RAS players that have access to the newest technologies in order to drive down their costs, or will we see more of a kind of atomized industry? I think that given the fact that you guys have had the experience of, building one of these companies to an industrial scale, you'd have a nice insight on this.
Sure, thank you. I think it's helpful to look at previous developments in seafood, or to some extent general industry, where scale does matter. If you look at net pan farming in the 80s and the 90s, it was an early technology that had quite some challenges, and it was more common to lose net pans to storms. As the technology matured and know-how was accumulated, I believe the 5 or 10 large players in salmon we know of today were the first to perfect operational excellence and build scale that makes it more difficult to compete with them. So overall, I expect that while the technology will over time become more accessible, the ones to build scale in the relevant markets will secure a sector leading position, almost like in any other technology or sector.
Right, that's great. Thank you very much. And I'll move to John Buchanan. We do have a couple of questions that are more on the technical aspects of RAS farming, and I think one of the interesting questions. There are several, but I'll start with one. On the aspect of feed, what species has the highest FCR ratio or feed conversion ratio in a RAS environment? Do you have a view on that?
Sure. So I guess, first of all, FCR is a very difficult assessment to make. It depends on the amount of energy that goes into the feed and what's calculated, and it's quite different across different species. So it's probably not a simple answer to that. If we go back to economics, where's the feed been developed to be most efficient and used by the fish? And then importantly for RAS as well, is how is the feed utilized? Is the protein in the feed going into muscle as opposed to being broken down into energy, which produce waste, which puts a load on the filter? So the most advances, and Skretting can come as well, but most advances have been in salmon feeds for RAS. I think that's where the most, where we are most technologically ahead. But the same concepts can be applied to any of the emerging species. So really, it's a matter of selecting the fish, and you can have a selective program to improve FCR by breeding or by genome editing or for example, Aqua Bounty, the technology they have improves the FCR by 10 to 15% over conventional salmon. So there's advantages you can have in the genetics of the fish and advantages you can make in the feeds. And we're still at the early stages, so probably not a clear answer there, but it's going to be a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and actually just a quick follow-on question. One of the lingering doubts about land-based systems is the off-taste, and how some of the solutions that you guys look at as an R&D center. Do you look at this area, and do you think that the land-based technologies to date have overcome this problem?
So we have looked at that and been part of some research there. My feeling again is probably most advanced in salmon. But yes, I think there's a fundamental understanding of the causes of off flavor and ways to address it in RAS. So I don't have a lot of, that's an ongoing area of research, but I feel like we're over the hump in that space.
Right, that's great. There are one or two questions on the, still we see catastrophic losses. We do have questions on Atlantic Sapphire. I think, Roberto, I'd like to go to you. I won't put you on the spot by asking you what's going on at Atlantic Sapphire, but perhaps we do see, I mean, even from within the salmon industry, we see still a lot of big losses at the post-smolt facilities. How do you think from the engineering side, this major challenge can be solved?
Well, first, you're not troubling me at all, because I have no idea what happened there. It's not that we are involved or anything. I am quite disappointed to hear what happened there. And Atlantic Sapphire is one of the biggest industry leaders here, and whatever they do is affecting the entire industry, for better or for worse. And I hope that they will recuperate soon from that. I believe that our investors and our partners and our customers are smart people who understand that there are different technologies, even within this niche of RAS. There are different technologies. There are many differences between those technologies and between those projects. Each project is very different from one another. It has different parameters, different challenges, different water sources and water parameters, etc. And all of these things need to be taken into consideration when you are taking on this RAS facility for yourself. I think it's rather, I don't know, to blame the technology on anything that is going on, only the technology is at fault, is like blaming, it's like shunning the automotive industry because someone had a car accident. It's not true. As I said before, we do take precaution measures in the early design of these projects. I already mentioned what we do in the design and the redundancy factors that we put in, the firewalls, all these measures to pre-assess and see in advance, foresee in advance any failures, any malfunctions that can happen. We are very much involved with our customers, and we support them and accompany them throughout the design and construction, and as much as we can also throughout the operation. And we're very much involved to the extent that they allow us to be. And in this way, we can ensure that not only the technology is sound and reliable, but also the practices themselves throughout the production.
Great, thank you. And actually, I thought I would pose a similar question to Stian, just on the challenges with RAS. Perhaps if you could answer that, and also just. I think as well, like maybe just what has changed, has the technology or has anything changed? So are these systems still just as prone to failure as they were 5 or 10 years ago?
Sure. So I think it's important to recognize that there are risks involved with being a pioneer in a segment such as ROS. Achieving biological and operational excellence, it isn't going to be a straight line, as we've seen with some of the incidents in the media. It may be a bumpy road. But we also have to remember that early days of aquaculture didn't come without obstacles. It's part of the industry DNA to solve these challenges with innovation. And we are a science-based company. We strongly believe that the challenges facing ROS today can be solved through technology. And I love this anecdote about Skretting's history, where in 1960 we conducted our first aquaculture trials in wooden pens in a fjord with rainbow trout. And from a few thousand individuals caught and fed to survive, which of course at the time was considered a huge success. And these 2 individuals became 6 meals. And then if you fast forward to 2019, Skretting has produced feed to support 21.5 million seafood meals every day. And the gap between 1960 and 2019 was bridged primarily through R&D. Now in Skretting alone annually, we spend 15 million euros on innovation through ARC, which is our Aquaculture Research Center. And we have a team of experts at ARC working with ROS, as well as dedicated ROS facilities. So we can examine the impact of the feed, not only on the fish, but also on the system itself.
Right. Actually, I was just a quick follow-up question. How much can changes in feed formula tackle some of these challenges? We typically see a lot of the failures around the biofilter and the accumulation of H2S. I just wondered if feed can in any way sort of, address those challenges.
Sure. So we are working closely with all of our customers to understand their specific needs and support their success. And feed, as you hint to, is an important input to the many different interactions that take place within the facility. Because as we know in ROS, you're not only feeding the fish, but you're also feeding the system. And the quality of ROS feed contributes to less waste and more fish at a lower risk. This is independent of species. It was a good point I thought earlier, where I think it was John who mentioned that what we're learning in salmon, both traditional and within ROS, is applicable to other species as well. The fish needs good digestibility. The farmer needs a low FCR, and that's achieved through precise nutrition. Also, the system needs good feed physical quality with minimal waste and easily removable feces. And I think that we have the products to address these factors and greatly reduce the risk for our customers. Now, our ROS feed concept is being rolled out alongside the projects being built across the globe. We have initiated a factory certification program to ensure that the ROS feeds are of consistent high quality. So it doesn't matter where in the world you want to place your system, as long as we have a certified plant that can supply it, you can expect the same quality as you would in a different region.
Right, that's great, thank you. And Ohad, I'm going to give you a couple of the tougher questions that we've got so far. I hope they're not too tough. Firstly, I think one question, you're the best, perhaps the best person to answer this as well. Is the market willing to pay premium price for RAS raised fish? I know I've seen you in action, marketing your fish, and I'd love to get your insights on that.
Yeah. Well, while I personally feel sustainably produced local product deserves a premium, I do not see it as a business plan, but as a bonus. Meaning, I do think it's important when analyzing the right market product fit to assume you will need to be competitive. And of course, we have seen that our sustainability efforts, operating on 100% renewable energy, growing our fish without antibiotics, does open some doors that would otherwise be closed. And at times we do achieve a premium, but our base case is that we have to be competitive.
Great, thank you. And tough question number 2. Lots of questions on when a RAS facility can reach profitability, and I just wondered if you could address your own roadmap to break even with Kingfish.
Yeah.
And how that looks like.
Yeah, well, I think, of course, there could be various scenarios. I can imagine low-cost systems supporting low-value species achieving profitability in some scenarios and in some markets. From our perspective, it was important for us relatively early on to focus on proving the unit economics, meaning we are currently in growth mode and are investing substantially in building up the personnel of the team. We have already 5 full-time employees in Maine and a hatchery running larval rearing for the future facility, but we constantly look at specifically the unit economics, where we feel already comfortable with the prospects for profitability.
Great, thanks very much. John, I'm going to give you a question that's come in about IMTA systems, and it's quite an interesting question. There's a lot of buzz around the sort of mixed aquaculture trophic systems. And forgive me that I've forgotten the exact words that make the acronym. But what do you make of? Could there be some sort of way of fusing these two technologies with intersystems?
So you mean multitrophic aquaculture?
I do. Multitrophic, yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. Aquaculture systems.
So it's a great question. So I'm not an expert in the area, but been around some research, and in the end, some colleagues that were working in building complicated systems linking tilapia and vegetables, and they found the best solution was to grow the tilapia in one tank, collect the waste, and then fertilize the vegetables. So maybe not fully linked, but RAS does give us the opportunity to recapture most of the waste and repurpose it. And that's just my opinion, but I see that as a really exciting and benefit to the technology, more so than linking them together, which there's potential there as well. But at the most basic level, recapturing the waste and repurposing it is something that we can definitely do. Right.
And what do you make of aquaponics systems, where we've seen companies such as Superior Fresh, building these models? Do you think that will really take off, where the aquaculture component is kind of integrated into another food system?
So this would be more of a personal opinion, but I certainly hope so, and I hope they're successful. It's a great concept, and I think as we spoke earlier, they're pioneering the way, and there'll be bumps along the way, but if there's a way to get it done, there's people out there that are working on it. So I look forward to those results, and it's a great idea. Right. And just a quick follow-on question, if I may. There's a couple of questions about the sustainability of land-based systems, the fossil fuel usage. What do when you take a high-level view of aquaculture and you look at the contrasting systems, how do you think the RAS systems compare on sustainability metrics? Yeah, so I think it's highly competitive, especially if it's local, because so much of our seafood is transported around the globe. So that RAS gives us the opportunity to locate facilities near consumption, which is an obvious win. And the other part there is the world moves to more sustainable forms of energy. RAS becomes a much more sustainable because energy is the major input there. So I think it's a winning technology in that regard. Right. That's great. Thank you. And just there's a couple more questions on capital. Jeff, I'm going to come back to you on the capital elements of RAS technology. We've seen that the Norwegian Stock Exchange has been an important outlet for investments in land-based systems. What about in Asia? Do you think major investors in Asia are ready to back kind of major systems? I am quite intrigued as well with your own model that you're looking to other continents. Perhaps does that speak of maybe the difficulty of raising finance in Asia, or do you think that
major groups are ready to back projects?
Actually, when we look at the price earnings ratio in the Chinese stock exchange, some of these fish feed companies, some of these fish farms, they're trading about 100 times over their PEs. So actually, people really buys into this, especially when you are profitable. Okay, and everybody knows that RAS has a social impact. You save energy, it provides more organic fish, and it's just that the Chinese market is different because Chinese market likes live fish rather than the fish being processed. So where we see in terms of capital, I can see China being one. It's they have a clean water policy, so definitely a lot of capital will go into the RAS system in China, and also globally because the dependence on the U.S. import market. The United States will put in a lot of capital to build its own fish farms in terms of tilapia. Okay, think about it, right? Before the trade war, the Cheng group out of Hainan, they were able to sell annually 4,800 container tilapia to Walmart. Now 4,800 containers gone, right? So there's no more tilapia to the U.S. So the Chinese went to Brazil, to South America, and bought all the tilapia out of South America and Brazil. So the Brazilian tilapia almost like 100 times. So that gives you the story, right? So to extend that, that's why we are expanding into the U.S., having locally grown. And another thing that I want to kind of point out is that, we are different. We're trying to do something that everybody else is different, because everybody's so focused on technology, the design. Your RAS system is so high tech. But remember one thing is when you get to high tech, you have to hire high tech people. And that's something that we realize. Okay, and we try to give our system to be tested by the local farmers. We found that the simple systems are the easiest way to give. We wanted to design a simple system that everybody can use. Maybe it's cheaper to have a system that is so high tech, so energy efficient. But remember, your fish farmer, they are not like super engineers. So in a way, we want to be the IKEA of RAS. I want somebody to buy our system. They can install it themselves by watching a video, and voila, you're done. So that's what we have done in the last, design. So, and that's why, because of COVID, it kind of gave us. So we're going to see a lot of merger and acquisition going on, especially COVID. What happened in COVID. So in terms of the capital, I think definitely from the public side and the private side, a lot of money will be put into RAS investment. And also, we're trying to encourage not only the big players, we're trying to encourage the small players, even individuals, to join. The Brazilian government is inviting us to Brazil mainly because they want to improve poverty. They want us to build systems in Brazil so each individual farmers can fish farm tilapia and sell it back to the government.
Right.
So that's something we're working on right now.
Excellent. And just we have run out of time. We've gone over the hour, but I do want to pose this question as well to one or two others just to get the sort of full picture here. I think this is a really intriguing part of what's going on. Roberto, from Aqua Mouth's position in the world, you guys look at the entire planet. Where do you see the capital coming from? But to date, we've seen it come a lot from Nordic investors, and one or two groups in the US. Do you think that we'll see a more global spread of investment, or just more of the same?
Well, I'm not a financial expert, but I can say that it starts with entrepreneurs. It starts with people that want to establish these projects and take on the sustainable and environmentally friendly and local production and food safety, all these important principles, and also the profitability, of course, of fish farming. And I think that capital comes from a lot of from many different resources. It is Also evident that the big market leaders such as Nutrico, Skretting, and others are also investing in land-based projects. That just goes to show that they believe in this industry. They believe in the successfulness of these projects. And it's going to be more and more evident as more and more projects are coming through the pipeline.
Great, thank you very much. Stian, what's your view? Regional or we see global developments?
Sure, yeah. Well, if I'm looking at it from our perspective, then I have to look to New Frontiers. For those of you who don't know, New Frontiers is the investment arm of Nutreco. It's independent from Skretting, where I work. And they make investment in RAS projects on standalone business decisions. But our joint purpose is the same. It's feeding the future. That's the overarching reason for investing. And Nutreco invests for the sake of learning and to identify new opportunities to solve challenges in feeding a growing population. Now, in addition to this, I think it's important to say that we need the innovation, right? We need, for example, land-based to create and sustain more food production capacity. And in addition, New Frontiers invest in companies that we think, and now I'm talking about both Nutreco and Skretting, that we can add value to and to contribute to the success of, meaning boosting their growth or through careful focus on technology, on people, and also on investments. And parts of why we do it, parts of the return on investment that we're expecting is the opportunity to learn as much as we can early in the game, right? Because as I said, we're still in the pioneering stage here, which allows us to focus on how to contribute and better supply the market through feed and services. And eventually, of course, you never know, these investments may drive learning to support future business opportunities and also something that we can build on when we supply other species that enters the segment as well.
Great, thanks so much. And Ohad, I mean, from your position, you know, there's a facility in Europe. You've gone to North America. Would you consider other parts of the world?
I'm sure there are more attractive markets to look at, but from a management attention standpoint, we've identified Europe and North America as our key focus, where yellowtail kingfish makes sense for us as the first product, but we are and will continue to be actively looking at potential additions within these markets, as long as they tick the boxes of high value, import dependent, and perform well in our systems.
Great, thanks very much. And finally, John, just keen to ask you the same question, but also a twist on that question as well. Just in terms of where you see the most capital deployed to aquaculture technologies, you have a presence around the world. Just keen to get your view on where you see aquaculture evolving the fastest or it's progressing the quickest.
From a RAS perspective, it's still, at least in my opinion, from our experience, European and North American focused, and of course Israel is a big player there as well, and there's tons of development in China as well, and so in Southeast Asia around shrimp production. So I think it's at this point global in terms of the interest and the investment going into building production systems and then also into research. So global scope at this point is what my answer is.
Yeah, that's great. So do you think, very small final question, do you think that these systems can really sort of, fulfill the wider mission of feeding the world, or do you think it's more of a kind of niche, high value species opportunity?
I think that, so I can't remember who's, I think Ohad said this earlier, but we view it as another tool in the toolbox, and we need all the tools that we can find to feed the world. I don't think this is a replacement for anything. I think this is filling a way to grow the industry. And there's certain areas where net pen farming still makes sense, or pond farming makes sense, and certain areas where RAS will definitely be the solution. And having this ability only increases the flexibility of the industry to help solve problems and feed people.
That's fantastic. And I will draw this to a close now. Firstly, I'd really like to thank our distinguished panelists. I think it was a great conversation. We managed to get through quite a lot of questions, and also thanks to the audience for giving us so many great questions. Just a final thanks to our sponsors, the Center for Aquaculture Technologies and Leanlit, and just to let everybody know that there will be a replay of this webinar on Undercurrent News' YouTube channel. And look out for more webinars from us. We've got a nice pipeline of really interesting topics to talk about. So thanks very much to everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.